It has been some time now since the last update of the game. One might even be tempted to say that it has been a whole year since then, and let's get real, it pretty much has. In a way, it may even have been 5 if not 10 years since then. When I first started this project, I started it as a mere 14 years old boy, one who, most certainly, wasn't really supposed to find an eroge such as Monster Girl Quest at this age. Yet, I still had, and I had simply fallen in love with it. Its characters, its story, and of course the gargantuous amount of bowling parties inside of this game made me truly fall in love with the universe of MGQ. So much so that I had planned, me who loved video games to a severe addiction back then, to create my own side story. A simple mod which would fit into the game through the MGQ wiki. However, it didn't take long before I wanted to modify the game beyond just adding a simple story. Inserting myself in the universe through the character of Nolwenn and then flipping the point of view from Luca to a mere slave to Alice, I ended up launching Monster Girl Quest Servant of the Monster Lord on the 24th of February in 2014. At the start, I worked on the game whenever I had the chance, as I was both interested in making games and was also incredibly bored in real life. 3 years later, I ended up releasing the blog post for the game and took my own turn on it. Inserting with probably often cringy humor and memes, I kept working on the patch somewhat correctly. Until reality cocked back to me, that is. I was, after all, both depressed and nihilistic back then, and my own emotions would simply get the better of me at any given point. These outbursts would then lead me to becoming frustrated and lazy from working on the game, leading to months, if not years, of not working on it. Eventually, however, I managed to find my own way out of this hellish cycle and found, once again, the will to work on this game. Which is how the GameJot page that you now see came to life. At that point, I had already started to want to fundamentally change the MGQ world into my own. A world which, while it still had no name, had already started splitting itself from the MGQ1 ever since the page launched. As time went on, it ended up going way beyond the Korea too. The split grew larger and larger until eventually I was hit with the horrible realization that I was working on a game, an MGQ fangame, that had simply no longer anything to do with what was going on inside my head. In such cases, one would be tempted to simply call it quit and move on to working on what they'd actually want to make. But I'm afraid that, depressed or not, I was still one hell of a dingus. Thus the oh-so-great age of the millions of reworks befell upon us. Each time the game would be able to release, I would find myself frustrated with the game's story. So I would go on and correct it, thinking it was the final part that needed fixing before it could be properly released. Until I would then become dissatisfied with the characters, then the gameplay, then the art, then the music. One by one, I would change the mechanics of this game, and like any normal human being, I would get more and more frustrated on working on something I was fundamentally never satisfied enough with to release. This would, of course, lead me to a hellish cycle of never-ending procrastination. I would find myself not working on it out of laziness or frustration once again. Except that this time, instead of fits of anger filled with 1,000,000,000 curses, I would end up looking at the GameJot page, as an extreme amount of guilt would fill every fiber of my being up. Today, the game is a mess of half-done prototypes and story elements, completely unfit for releasing. And while the parts on their own do show potential, I can now clearly say that it is pretty much all MGQ SML is now. A big, unfinished prototype. One that can never truly turn into a game unless someone courageous enough to dig through the mess of coding and systems figures out a way of making them work with one another. A task that I, 9 months ago, had decided to take, and today regret taking, in a way. As the most important thing these past 5 years helped me understand was that I had simply no reasons to work on this game anymore. On a technical standpoint, the MGQ engine was extremely old and offered very limited options when it came to making new mechanics up. Coupled to the fact that Nicoria had pretty much fully formed inside my head now, MGQ SML could be considered a fade project, in that it had to struggle with both an identity crisis and an obsolete engine. And thus, here I stood, not even 3 months ago, thinking to myself what in the 5 circles of hell I was supposed to do, now that it had finally dawned upon me that I was working on this game out of nothing but a sense of duty, if you could call it that. The answer came to me pretty quickly in the form of a question. I was, after all, wondering whether I wanted to continue to make game or not at the base itself. I had, after all, failed miserably at that point, to my own eyeballs. And so, as with all questions that could not be answered that easily, I decided to test myself. Hard. I would go off to the only other engine I had ever briefly taken an interest into, known as Unity. I would then launch myself through the basics tutorial, seeing if I was, indeed, still enjoying it. And surprisingly enough, I fell into a trance, running project after project, learning to develop in far smarter way, and even messing with some code here and there. I was finally feeling the same rush I had when I just started. So much so that even after the silly idea of stopping to make games left my mind, I thrusted myself headfirst into any big project lessons I could find. In the end, I produced around 8 different projects, 5 of which were part of the Learn to Code course, a 36-hour course that will teach all the fundamentals of C#. A course I, at first glance, thought I'd never want to take. It was 36 hours after all. And yet, in the end, still ended up taking and finishing. Save for the labs assigned. Well, you'll see. Once I finally reached the very end of the course, which was all about creating a point-and-click game where you attempt to break boxes before they fall back down into the murky depths of hell itself, I simply started to boil with the desire of finally producing the SML of my dreams. But even after all that, I still didn't feel confident enough that I could bring my vision to life. And so I went and decided to mess around with it, creating a simple corridor, getting someone to help me craft or get some free prototype textures, and learning what I need to learn as time went on. In the matter of a few hours, I had now made a spooky level where the disabandoned user would pass from a nicely lit room to a darkened corridor. I even ended up figuring how to create a self-writing text to use in cutscenes. All of this was way too simple to turn into actual levels, of course. But that wasn't what I was looking for while I was making them. I wanted to know whether I simply had the capacity and the willingness to craft these prototypes, even if they would only be a showcase of my current absolute beginner skill. Once all that came to a close, that I finally stopped Unity after having finished all this, I took some time to myself to think on what I wanted to do. I even understood that the whole reason why I had chosen to use games to do so back then, and still am choosing them today as well, is simply because I enjoy playing and, it seems, making games. Would it have been that I had preferred music or literature, I would have gone there instead. All of this to say that I didn't specifically want to create video games. I wanted to specifically bring universes to life. And so I created a logo. Nothing too crazy for now, of course. I wasn't planning on becoming famous or rich anymore, unlike the tiny little thing that I once was. I simply came up with a decent sounding name and crafted me some form of brand to go under from now on. I then actually created a YouTube channel, and then a Twitter account, albeit solely for being able to give out news and not partake in social networking. I had, after all, now grown into a proper, respectful sociopath who wanted to angrily stab the people screaming outside my window in more than one occasion. Then, finally, I created a new Discord server, a simpler one which was geared toward announcement more than anything else. It was quite tedious to do, and I will proudly say that most of the rules I wrote down were stolen from another server, because I had absolutely no idea on what to write down aside the obvious. Once all this was done, it was now time for the final part of this whole rebirth of some sort. It was time for a new Game Jot project to appear. This next game is, in the end, still the same project, technically speaking. The game mechanics are the same, the main characters do not change, and while the story itself has evolved quite a lot, the general idea stays mostly the same too. All of this to say that the biggest change is, in the end, both the universe in which this story progresses and its new characters. I will not deny that some of the Nekoria cast is severely inspired from their MGQ counterpart, such as the Monster Lord herself as Alice was just so brilliantly written, the ideas I ended up having for my own Monster Lord fell quite heavily on the same pool of ideas Toro had for our favorite snake person. Some part of the cast, however, will not completely transfer into Nekoya as, once again, this world is only inspired from MGQ now, and no longer a parallel universe of some sort, meaning you may not come to see certain characters to replace the MGQ ones in Nekoya. Not that I have anything against them, rest assured, I'm fairly certain I have pretty much fallen for the entire main cast at that point. However, with all that being said, I still stay an absolute beginner, and while the concept of making a game are etched into my brain thanks to the MGQ prototypes I made, comparing C- and Visual Basics is like setting side by side a jolly looking good rock and the goddamn moon itself. Which is why this is only me announcing the official start of the development of the game rather than actually promising a release date for it. As time will go on and on a half a month basis, I will continue to post regular updates on the evolution of the game through the YouTube channel. This time with my own beautiful voice that I'm sure you are most certainly enjoying. Unless you've been praying to get to the end of this ever since you launched the damn thing, of course. In the absurd amount of time it took to get to this point, I am most certain all of you has grown as much as I have. 10 years is, after all, enough to raise a whole new generation to adulthood. And if you still kept an eye out for this game even as your life progressed forward, I have to say that I am profoundly touched. In a way, it even makes me smirk to think that I still dream of making games even after having gotten into adulthood, and you still want to play them, even with your lives having progressed so damn much. I reassure you right now, in case you are wondering, but I am doing this because I want to, not because I feel guilty for having made you wait for 10 whole years to release this thing. As I'm sure we can all agree that working out of guilt like I have over the past 2 years isn't the smartest nor the healthiest of things to do. Which is also why I'll perfectly understand if you decide to end this adventure here. You are in the entire right to decide to do so after all, and you most certainly have all the reasons in the world to do so as well. I am, after all, still busy with my own life as much as you are, and as I'm writing these lines, I remember this was a video I wanted to release 4 days ago instead of today, but couldn't because of both work and personal matters. But do know that if you are willing to continue to follow me on this new Point Origin adventure, I will be most thankful to you. But also that if you decide to leave it there, I'll also be thankful to you for having supported this project back when you did. You people have no idea how much it helped me to know there were people who actually wanted to play my game. And I'll always be thankful to you for all that, regardless of your decision on the matter. With all that being said, comes the end of this big update on where things stand. I leave you to decide what you personally decide to do when it comes to this, and, all over again, remember that this is just a game in the end. While it may mean a lot to me, it surely does not have to do so to you. So feel free to choose where you yourself want to go from this point on. All of the links will be available beneath this post, and the GameJot page itself will launch the day after this is posted. The links to it will then appear on the last post of the SML page for you to rejoin it. As for the current Discord server, it will stay open until the first update of SOTML, and then deleted off, giving you ample time to migrate to it from the invitation that will be added in it beneath this video. Sleep well, SML. No matter what happens, you'll be the one who'll have ended up bringing me here and giving me a proper dream to follow. One that I hope I'll be able to share with all of you.